Hey, greetings, everyone. Lieutenant Colonel Alan West here, and welcome to the Steadfast and Loyal podcast.
You gotta light 'em up before they burn it down. Better dig deep, put 'em in the ground. Blood on their hands, they're hellbound. Save us all. Ooh, they're gonna burn it down. Save us all before they burn it down.
Hi, I'm Lieutenant Colonel Alan West, and throughout my life, from military to public service, the right to bear arms responsibly has been a fundamental belief. That's why I stand with United Patriot Supply. They're redefining what it means to be a firearms dealer by combining the experience and know-how of a traditional gun shop together with the selection and pricing power of a modern e-commerce company. Stop by our flagship store in Seneca, Kansas, or visit us online at UnitedPatriotSupply.com. Hey, greetings, everyone. Welcome back to the Steadfast and Loyal podcast. Just recently I had the opportunity to watch a new documentary called The Fall of Minneapolis. Because if you remember all of the riots and everything that occurred centered around the death of George Floyd, there was a lot of disinformation and misinformation out there. And of course, it seems to me that you can be on the left side and you can go out and burn down communities and police precincts, and that's perfectly acceptable. That's not an insurrection. So I thought that we'd have on the person that produced that documentary, and that is Liz Collin. Liz Collin is a multi-Emmy award-winning reporter and news anchor. She is also a public speaker and media producer. Her work includes the Amazon bestseller, They're Lying, The Media, the Left, and the Death of George Floyd, October 2022, and the documentary, The Fall of Minneapolis, which came out last year, November. As a truth speaker for more than 20 years, Liz has given a voice to many who otherwise would have been kept silent, and her investigative reporting has led to the founding of new state laws. Liz is a Minnesota native who lives in the Twin Cities area with her husband, Bob, who is a U.S. Army veteran and a former Minneapolis police lieutenant and union leader. She has one adventurous son and a beautiful, loyal lab. Liz, thanks for joining us here at the Steadfast and Loyal podcast.
Colonel, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. Good to talk to you here again.
Well, good. Please call me Alan, okay? And it was great to see you down here in Dallas screening your documentary, The Fall of Minneapolis. But how did you get into the world of, news and investigative journalism?
Oh gosh, how did I get into it? It's funny. I was always a very I say nosy, but perhaps I should say a bit better that I was curious. I was curious from a pretty early age, and really always liked to hear about other people's backgrounds and their stories. And actually, I kind of became obsessed, as crazy as it sounds, with the news. From the time I was 5 or 6 years old, and I started a newspaper when I was 10 with some friends in the neighborhood. But was always really driven to be a television reporter and anchor. It's what I told people I always wanted to be when I grew up. And as far as the investigations are concerned, they always take a lot more time and more effort. But I really always loved working on several different things at once, and really getting to the bottom of things and helping people better understand the world around them.
When you look at Minneapolis, St. Paul, that area, it is not exactly a strong bastion of, conservatism. What was it like for you being a journalist, which definitely holds more of a conservative principle and values in your heart, being in that area, being in that news media area?
Yeah, good question. It's interesting too, growing up in kind of small town Minnesota where I did grow up. it seems many of us never even talked about politics. I mean, I always say, even growing up, I really wasn't even aware of my parents' political leanings, and now just to see how polarized things have become. But I say too, this really isn't so much for me. I was never a political person as a journalist. I never thought that was too appropriate. I've really been sort of a fact finder and focused on the truth more than anything else. So to see, really, it was the left that took over all of this in the wake of George Floyd's death, and that's why I say this isn't necessarily a fight against Republicans, Democrats, whatever. This is truly evil, in my opinion, what I saw, and I think the facts point to that as well, where all of these so-called leaders could go ahead and get away with these lies.
Yeah, that's the amazing part of it. As I sat there and watched your documentary, it was amazing to me all of the facts that you presented, irrefutable, and you were able to back it up. But tell us, how was it that you were able to get a hold of all of the actual body cam video from different angles of the police that were there on that day?
Yeah, the lying really started, from really moment one with all of this. This is the very first time in Minneapolis police history that body camera footage is withheld from the public. Under normal circumstances, and any critical incident that would be released in very short order. So you sort of knew there was a reason that they kept this hidden for nearly 2.5 months before those body cameras came out, and that was only because an international news agency leaked them to the public. Which was quite interesting. But we were able to get the body camera footage, was then all attached to the court case and became part of the public file. But again, I still say to this day, Alan, I don't feel that you've earned the colonel the title for sure. So I don't feel comfortable calling you that. But they went ahead and kept this hidden. If they would have just went ahead and walked frame by frame, fully, I think, explained what the officers were doing, what George Floyd was saying, what he wasn't saying, et cetera. I just don't think we'd even be here having this conversation today.
One of the interesting cover-ups that I saw looking at this, not just the video camera evidence from all the different angles, but the level of fentanyl and drugs that were in his body. Why, again, how can you have these quote-unquote forensic experts hiding evidence? And if I'm correct, a lot of this evidence was not allowed to be admissible into the trial.
Yeah, so also something that stood out very early on in this case is you have George Floyd's autopsy done within 12 hours of his death. But again, that information is not made public. Instead, you have these meetings happening behind the scenes that are well documented, which is what we use in the book, which is called "They're Lying: The Media, the Left, and the Death of George Floyd." And then we have just some of those that are used in the documentary. Actually, the book goes into greater detail as to what's happening behind the scenes with, again, the Hennepin County Medical Examiner and prosecutors, and also the FBI is in on those meetings too in those days that follow, which is then when you have sort of this changing narrative that the public then hears about for the first time nearly a week later when they release the official autopsy on the same day that George Floyd's family releases their own autopsy, which the media touts as an independent autopsy. But yeah, you're right. Those results showing there's 3 times the lethal amount of fentanyl in George Floyd's system, methamphetamine. Sadly, he has a bad heart. There's a pelvic tumor that many have said required much more testing. Medical professionals have described George Floyd as, a bit of a ticking time bomb. There were many issues going on, but yet you have these doctors hired by George Floyd's family talking to the public about how he was a very healthy young man.
Which was a complete lie among many of the lies that surround this. One of the things that I found quite perplexing was the immediate FBI involvement in this. I mean, that's not something that normally happens, would you say?
No, and this is something I, sort of heard about through my husband being the union president at the time, and at that time didn't think that much of it. But I think now what's come out over these last few years with the FBI and the Department of Justice really being under the microscope, it's It is quite interesting. Never happened before where the FBI was called in within hours of this incident, in fact, happening. And the chief of police at the time, Madera Arredondo was his name. He has since retired from the Minneapolis Police Department, but he's the one who told Bob, my husband at the time, that he made the call. And my husband questioned that, why are you calling the FBI? All at this point we have is this, Facebook video that was obviously getting a lot of attention within just a short amount of time. But my husband sort of pushing back, saying, aren't we going to look at the body camera footage? Aren't we going to, sit down with these officers, et cetera? But none of that was done. Again, unlike other cases from before.
Complete violation of protocol, would you say?
Oh, absolutely. And that's why I sort of, documented this from the beginning, because that protocol was not followed from the beginning. So which is why you can sort of see how this was able to sort of shape a narrative, and how they kept so much of this from the public to sort of manipulate the message they wanted out there.
A lot of folks are talking about what happened with the restraint technique. The chief of police lied about that restraint technique. I mean, that was in their police handbook. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, this was also in the very early days that we have the police chief and the mayor of Minneapolis, Jacob Fry, say to the press during several press conferences, this is not how we train. We don't recognize what these officers are doing at 38th and Chicago to George Floyd. And then I go online, and you can easily see that there are these two missing pages from the police manual. The only two pages I should mention that are gone, that are just skipped over. So again, this is like day two. After that, and this is when I kind of start this mantra that I kept shouting in my newsroom, that they're lying, because they really were, and I didn't really fully understand, I think, the depths of those lies for some time. The trial, I think, helped to hit that home too. But you're right, when the police chief takes the stand, he's under oath, and the head of training does the same, and they both testified to say that MRT was not a part of training, even though it's been in these police manuals that we found dating back to the early 90s. So for decades, and then talking to many officers for the documentary who have all been trained in maximal restraint technique.
Yeah. When you talk about the trial, one of the things that I found just absolutely unconscionable was the judge in the trial not allowing certain very important pieces of evidence to be admissible into the trial. I mean, how can a judge do that? I thought that we're supposed to get to the truth, and we are supposed to allow all evidence to be presented, but it seems that this judge was cherry picking what could be presented to the jury.
Yeah, it does seem in a way that the script was written before the jury was even selected in Derek Chauvin's trial. The judge, Judge Peter Cahill is his name, who's still serving in Hennepin County. He went ahead and said that he would not allow the maximal restraint technique, that training slide, to be shown to the jury, because it seemed that Derek Chauvin had not signed his name in the last time that was trained for officers in Minneapolis. So it was very nuanced. And even though Derek is telling his attorney, I certainly had been trained in this for, again, for decades. So that was the reason that the judge gave. So you're right, again, that the jury was never even able to see that training slide in Derek Chauvin's trial.
And then the other thing was the selection of the jury. I mean, you're supposed to have an unbiased selection of the jury, but tell us about the questionnaire that went out there, that many of these people were asked if they had alignments or affiliations with Black Lives Matter or agreed with Black Lives Matter.
Yeah, there were many questions. In fact, actually, even the jury instructions really stood out as being very different in this case too. That was 14 pages of jury instructions that they were given. A typical case would perhaps be one or two. So there were so many things, and many of that came out even after the trial as well. How there was a juror who was, marching in a Black Lives Matter protest and lied about that. saying that he just wanted so badly to be a part of this jury. So again, so many questionable things in our so-called justice system. And I think Alex King, again, he's the black officer who arrested George Floyd that nobody wants to talk about, but speaking to him in prison, and he simply says, his narrative didn't fit this whole thing, which is why he was quickly cast aside. And he talks about that. Do we really want our justice system to be ruled by mob mentality, and for the media to manipulate us? And he's talking, very eloquently, I think, from behind bars, saying that we have to decide where we are as a country if this is how we want things to continue.
Now, you talk about being behind bars. You also did an interview with Derek Chauvin from behind bars, and he just recently was attacked in jail, if I'm correct. You brought that out.
Yeah, it was actually just about 9 days after we released the documentary in the middle part of November, that shockingly, Derek Chauvin is stabbed 22 times in this facility where he'd been for 15 months in Tucson, Arizona, medium security prison system run by the federal government here. This is a federal facility, and this the guy who went ahead and attacked Derek that day said that he was doing it, after or doing it on Black Friday for Black Lives Matter. He's a former FBI informant that I think is sort of struggling to get back. He's back in that same facility and in the medical unit, but he'd been sort of working before this and had never had any issues at that prison before.
One of the things that they tried to paint these officers there on the scene as being uncaring about George Floyd, but they called for emergency medical support quite quickly after being engaging him. And are we correct? And what was the essence of the delay that we saw for those EMS, EMT people to arrive at the scene?
Yeah, so you actually have Thomas Lane calling for that ambulance 36 seconds after George Floyd is on the ground. A timeline that of course the politicians did not pick up on, obviously. And then you have Tutau, who the crowd control, that's Derek Chauvin's partner that day. He asks, a couple minutes later, did you call the ambulance? Because he's already questioning, where are they at this point? And that's when he gets on the radio and tries to get the ambulance there even sooner. So they're recognizing that under normal circumstances, it would take 2-3 minutes tops for an ambulance to respond. And then you see the ambulance come about 10 minutes later. Their lights and sirens are not on, which is strange. The fire department, which is actually perhaps the first rig that should have been on scene, takes another 10 minutes to respond, and they're going into Cup Foods looking for someone. But from the public documentation, it just seems that there was some chatter about there was someone, sort of, for better words, tattling on the officers that then lost track of what was actually transpiring and waited quite a while to get an ambulance there. And then you have the fire rig basically say that they were dispatched to the wrong location and they didn't even know where they were. And they admit that on camera. All things that, again, the jury was never allowed to hear in Derek Chauvin's trial.
Amazing. Last couple of things I want to talk to you about. The thing, when I watched your documentary, that really touched me was the trauma that those police officers went through. Watching their police precinct be, completely turned over to the mob and be destroyed. And it kind of reminded me of that last scene in Black Hawk Down, where some of the Rangers had to run out of Mogadishu back to friendly lines. You had some of those officers that had to run. Some of them were, in vehicles, and of course they were being pelted with rocks and whatever. What type of depraved mentality would allow the mob to take over a structure that's supposed to stand for law enforcement?
Yeah, that was probably the most difficult interviews to even get through, because these officers, I'd never seen that type of emotion, to be quite honest, and I've been a reporter for 20 years, from members of law enforcement. Again, these are people, and a lot of them had military backgrounds as well. And that's why I think, Minneapolis really did lose the best of the best when it came to their police force. But all of them broke down in tears, and a lot of them did in very short order. It wasn't like I interviewed them for hours on end. So this is just, so hard for them, I think, even several years later, for them to wrap their head around how their careers ended and how they were scapegoated and served up to the mob, and many of them, recounting this, how they're basically running for their lives, and you hear in the documentary how they're turned down again and again. They can't use any type of force on these, so-called peaceful protesters, when that certainly was not the case. There's many injuries, and it was really sad, I think, to hear those stories for sure.
Closing thought: the aftermath now in Minneapolis. How has the George Floyd incident, which we know was an incredible cover-up, lies, deceit, deception, how has that changed Minneapolis?
Yeah, there's a reason, I think, that we called the documentary "The Fall of Minneapolis," because you really can point to those days as leading to where we are now, and that is cars stolen in record numbers, carjackings that were never even tracked before. There were hundreds of those every year in Minneapolis. You have a police force that was nearly 900 officers strong back in the early days of May of 2020. That number has dwindled to barely 500 at this point, but all of their policies have been rewritten, so they can't really even do much as far as police work is concerned. But many people relocating, moving out of the city. Many places that people just won't go in the city anymore. And that includes, the downtown area, the uptown area of Minneapolis. And it's sad to see. I actually owned a home in Minneapolis for nearly a dozen years, and, loved the city. But again, the crime has really touched, but before it would be, your friend's uncle's cousin's sister, that type of thing. And then all of a sudden it becomes your friend, and then it's you. I mean, that's how close that these stories hit close to home. And at Alpha News, where I am now in Minnesota, we bring out a lot of those victims, because sadly, many of them have lost their voice in all of this too.
Incredible. Liz Collin, where can people follow you? How can people, have you come to their city and do a screening of The Fall of Minneapolis?
Yeah, so everything is on thefallofminneapolis.com. We have our different interviews we've done, and news articles. There's also all of our research there for the documentary. People like to paint me as some sort of crazy conspiracy theorist, but our great director and writer, Dr. J.C. Shea, has posted all of the research there that we've worked on for several years. And I'm easy to find, just Liz Collin on all social media. And that's where I am now with Alpha News, who helped us produce this documentary. And the documentary is available for free, so we want as many people to watch it as possible. It's on YouTube, on Rumble, pretty easy to find.
I guess I should ask in closing, how has this documentary changed your life?
How has it changed my life?
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually think that you ask very good questions, by the way. I know I've said that already. I think that it's restored my faith in humanity a bit, that people still care about the truth. I think for years I was sort of wondering if that was the case anymore. I'm sad to see that, there hasn't been much as far as getting these officers out. Or more work there. That's obviously part of the legal system. But again, I think we have nearly 7, if not 8 million people that have watched this already, and people from across the country, because we're all paying the consequences to this day. And I think this is an example of very poor leadership that spread all across the country as well. And people are calling for change, which I think is a good thing.
Well, I want to thank you, Liz, because you are a courageous person, and you are a truth-telling person. And this constitutional republic will only survive if we have men and women of courage that are willing to go out there and tell the truth. So thank you so much for joining us here at the Steadfast and Loyal podcast. And ladies and gentlemen, I just want to thank you all for joining us and watching this episode of the Steadfast and Loyal podcast. If you liked this program, please click the like button and share it with others. And until next time, steadfast and loyal.
Before they burn it down.